This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
Good morning, good evening, namaste, namaskar, vanakkam, and welcome to Bharat FM. Thanks for joining with me on this new episode of Connect for a Cause. It's me, RJ Preeti, and I will be your host for today's show. Labor trafficking, the modern day slavery, though it looks almost invisible, but yet it's still prevalent in most of the parts of the world, including United States of America. Labor trafficking is significantly underreported, and victims are often hidden in plain sight and they're afraid to speak out. So, today we are having this discussion to raise awareness about labor trafficking, to support victims, and hold the perpetrators accountable. So, today is going to be an amazing show, and I'm definitely elated to be a part of this show today. So, we have some eminent personalities on our show today who clearly have a great passion for human rights. So let me bring in our guest of so let me bring our guest today now. Today we have Mr. Errol D'Souza, the survivor of labor trafficking. He is the co-founder of Eyes Open International, a non-profit group that focuses on combating human trafficking through empowerment. Welcome, Mr. D'Souza.
Thank you, Preeti. I really appreciate your time and talent.
Our chief guest of honor is Mr. Dave Yost, Ohio's 51st Attorney General, who has extensive experience in rooting out fraud, holding the corrupt accountable, and reforming the government. He has been working to help chart a strong future for his people by fighting injustice and by protecting his state and his families. Welcome you, sir, Mr. Dave Yost, the Attorney General.
Thank you, Preeti. It's good to see you, Harold.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, sir, for joining with us today. Along with our Attorney General, we have two more people from his office. We have Ms. Carol O'Brien, the Chief Counsel for Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. Mr. O'Brien she oversees 7 sections within the attorney's office. We also have Ms. Jennifer Rausch, the Legal Director for Human Trafficking Initiative with the Ohio Attorney General's office. Welcome, Ms. Carol, and welcome, Ms. Jennifer.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. Along with them, we have Yvan, the CEO of HamiltonDemo. It is an executive search and placement company that helps Fortune 500 companies with its hiring needs and has a specialty in diversity recruiting. He has been involved with numerous nonprofit boards and community associations such as United States Global Leadership Council. And this is where he said that he has met Harold for the very first time. Welcome, Mr. Yvan Demosthenes.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, viewers, we would initially have a conversation with Mr. D'Souza and the Attorney General. And post this conversation, we will be having a detailed discussion on labor trafficking with the rest of the panel members. So, I highly suggest viewers, if you have questions, concerns, opinions, do put up on the comment section of this video. And if you are a victim of labor trafficking, please do not hesitate to call the hotline number that is being put up on the scrolling bar below this video. And if you are a survivor of labor trafficking, do share a few words on the comments so that it helps other survivors to feel that they are not alone here. And now, without any further ado, it's over to Mr. D'Souza and the Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Preeti. I will straight jump in because every second of the Attorney General Day host is very crucial, very important for all the victims, survivors, vulnerable population, and the community members globally, sir. So welcome, sir, to the show for partnering with a survivor. This means a lot not only to me, but all the victims and survivors. And jumping straight to the point, I want your opinion, sir, is that people, I always tell they're not to come to the US legally is heaven. But in the same breath, if people are coming illegally, is hell. Would you like to share something on this point, sir? Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right, Harold. We do have people coming into this country against their will or under coercion or being exploited, even if they come here with their consent. I just traveled to the Mexican border with my part of my team from the Attorney General's office, and we heard quite a few stories about how people are being imported into the United States and forced into labor. The southern border still has easy access points, and we have what are called coyotes smuggling them over. And frequently they charge a huge amount of money, $10,000 or more, multiples of that, for the smuggling. And then when they get into this country, they're forced to work that off at minuscule wages with penalties and expenses that are put into place. And ultimately, it makes it almost impossible for these people to ever be free. We've seen situations where people are being forced to work 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. It's a real thing. It makes one shudder to think that this could be happening in the United States or anywhere in the world in the 21st century. But here we are, and it's true, it's underreported, and it's invisible to most of society.
Yeah, that's a very good observation, and that's very kind of you to like go to the border, sir. But I just want to share with you that people, when I say not only in Ohio, but nationally, now and internationally in India, people love you, people respect you. And I want to share something very honestly as a survivor and as a survivor advocate, that you shine like a rainbow in the sky with 7 P's. And those 7 P's are like power, position, people, positivity, pulse, passion, and protection. And I want you to share something with our audience globally, that how do you balance, when especially I know when I say pulse, you know the pulse of the victims, you know the pulse of the survivors, you know the pulse of the perpetrators. That's one. Number two, I want you to share something with the audience is about the people. Like you are Attorney General with a lot of power, position. At the same breath, you have a family, and you are very human. So I just want you to share something on that particular front, sir. Thank you.
Well, Harold, I have to push back on you a little bit. The rainbow that you referred to, the what shines in this story is survivors, people like you who have a story, and that's what keeps me motivated. Hearing about people who were oppressed, who are now free. Obviously, there is a important part to play for those who protect the rule of law and who enforce it. And I'm pleased that I and my team get a chance to do what we call big good by working in human trafficking. But the focus really needs to be the incredible courage and the resiliency of people who are trafficked for their labor, who are treated like slaves, who manage to persevere, who don't allow their spirit to be shattered and press through and get to the other side. That's the real light. That's the inspiration that keeps all of us in the government working every day to try to eradicate this evil.
You're very humble. Like I work with a lot of victims and survivors, sir, in Ohio and in the US. And I've been interacting with a lot of immigrants, like from Mexico, Guatemala, Pakistan, Nepal, and people are really like, people respect you. And many times these immigrants, they ask me about the Attorney General because you have a lot of power. And I always tell them 4 things. I said, Attorney General Day host is a happy, humble, honest, and a good human being. So it's a fact that you are so passionate about victims and survivors, and you have so much responsibilities on you. Do you think that any amendments can be done? Like in sex trafficking, their felonies are expunged. So do you believe that we can do something on labor trafficking? I'm working on a project for the last 2 years, sir, like a freedom survey. And these are basically on immigrants. And I'm working at the office also with your team. Where do you consider or believe that something can be done for the immigrants genuinely? Like, I'm not trying to say something where their felonies can be expunged on case, like, on case to case basis, like without, like, they're not having any criminal records, but they have been manipulated, tricked, and trapped and done fraudulently by the perpetrators. So can we see some hope there, sir?
Yes, well, it's certainly the morally right thing to do when someone is coerced into committing a crime, that there be a means to make that right, to correct the record. And Jen Rausch, who is on one of your guests in the next segment, is an expert on the law, but I believe that she will tell you that there is room in Ohio's law to seek that expungement. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about what specific to labor trafficking we might do that has not been accomplished yet. Because you're exactly right. It's the moral imperative, I think, here is where someone has been coerced to recognize that they did not commit those acts of their own free will. The other thing that I want to mention to your viewers, I know you're well aware of this. I had not been aware of this before I met with Homeland Security at the border, is that there is a special visa program that is designed for people who have been trafficked. And I was relieved to hear that. I'm learning more about it right now, but it's something that perhaps somebody within the sound of our voices, within hearing of our voices, may be inspired to know that there is a specialized visa for human trafficking victims, and that Homeland Security is involved with that.
Oh, that's I think that's a very good news, sir. But I just want to share with my viewers globally. Like, I know there are people watching from Pakistan, UAE, India, Bangladesh, Mexico. I just want to share with my audience that when I met at the Attorney General Day host first time in the Columbus and at the state capitol, I just want to share, what makes you different is that, like a brown skinned guy like me, immigrant, you are so caring, compassionate. And I always tell that America is the destination, sir, is the destination. And countries like Mexico, Guatemala, India is the source. And what I realized, one thing is that in the United States of America, that we will keep on rescuing and saving victims or survivors of labor trafficking lifelong. To bring an end to this, I realized that I need to create a stop at my own country, begin with India, and tell people, please do not come to the United States of America undocumented. Or if you're coming on a B1, B2 visa, stay here for 6 months and go back. Do not break the laws. And having said that, I just want to share my regional director, Hriday Rawal, who is based in India, and he would just like to ask, he's doing an amazing job in stopping people in India and educating them, empowering them, and telling them, please do not go to the United States of America illegally, undocumented, or even if you go on a visa, just see that you do not break the rules. Because, for small example, if somebody comes on a C1D visa, he or she, and if he jumps the ship and comes to the US and gets married to an American, that visa can never be corrected. So Hriday, please join and say some few words to our Attorney General what you're doing in India. Thank you.
So first,
Morning.
all the Indians. So we have the Eyes Open international community here in India, around thousands of people, and they all love you. They have specially told me to say a very much thank you to you, that because you are present here and you are empowering, you are educating the community members, the vulnerable population, the survivors and victims globally. We are very privileged, proud, and thankful to you, sir, for sharing your valuable time. Also, sir, I would like to ask you that I have attended many webinars and seminars along with Mr. Harold D'Souza, but none of in these seminars or webinars that talk about the cyber trafficking. So, in these days, especially in this pandemic, the activities of the human trafficking are being done on this cyber level. Like there are many application and website where they recruit this, where they invest the fake campaigns to recruit the victims from globally. There's a company in USA who had a portal where people get registered and they get a job over there in USA. They bring those people and then they exploit them. Likewise, there are many companies in UAE. There are many fake companies in India, and none of them are talking about that. Also, if you talk about sex trafficking, then the recruiting is done by the media companies on many uh, on many dating portals. Also, now the trafficker are using the dark web where it is very difficult to catch them because their IP address cannot be traced. So, sir, is there a special mechanism or task force to deal with all this? Because we have to be proactive. We have to go and catch the traffickers from the internet. So we have to use the artificial intelligence, and with the help of proper keywords, we have to do a proactive search for this, sir. Is there any proper mechanism in Ohio or in the federal US government set up for fighting the cyber criminals for human trafficking?
I was having a little bit of breakup on my end here, but I heard most of what you said, and you're raising a good point. But I'd like to point out that this is a global problem. It's got international impacts. As the Attorney General of Ohio, I represent one state of the United States out of 50. There is an important role here for the United States federal government. And candidly, there needs to be international cooperation between companies and countries if we're going to actually do this. Here in Ohio, we're at the bottom of the pipeline, and we are doing our best where we can interact with individuals, but to really deal with this thing systemically, we need a systemic effort. And that's why I appreciate both you and Harold and your work to raise the awareness and to push the decision makers, not only in the States, but in Washington and in other countries, that this is something that simply cannot be ignored, cannot be swept under the carpet, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hriday, and thank you very much, Attorney General Dave Host. I have one very important challenge I face when I work with the victims and survivors in Ohio and in the US, sir. Like, we have a lot of shelter homes for girls in domestic violence, sex trafficking, but I feel labor trafficking is just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of victims are not coming out because they are mostly males. Like, there are certain Americans, but I would say, I don't have the stats, but I would say 90% of the victims in labor trafficking are foreign nationals. And from that 90%, 80% are male. And it's a shame, it's a stigma. But the biggest challenge is there are no shelter homes like for a male. So can you throw some light, sir, or are you working something on that? Like, there can be some shelter homes for male survivors or victims in labor trafficking in Ohio?
This is a difficult question. And Harold, I hope that you and I can have a conversation about what your ideas might look like on how to do that, how to approach this difficult set of issues. But you're correct. Language is a barrier. Frequently, culture is a barrier. one of the hallmarks of labor trafficking is that they isolate the traffickers and make it very difficult. They take their passports. They have them frequently in places where they have limited contact with outsiders. Let me give you a case right here out of Ohio. In 2014, we had 10 Guatemalan migrants. 8 of them were teenagers. Youngest was 14 years old, who were forced to work at a place called Trillium Farm Eggs. Now, it's out in Marion County. That's about an hour north of Columbus, Ohio. It's kind of out in the country. And they were forced to work 12-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week, to pay off their so-called debts. And the smugglers knew who their family members were at home and threatened to harm them if they didn't comply. So, they were kept in these trailers out in the country, kept us away from everybody. And, it ended well. The good news is our Ohio Senator Rob Portman launched an investigation, and they found out that the sponsors of these migrants were actually their traffickers, and were able to bring freedom to these captives. But you're right. It's typically, not exclusively, but typically a foreign national, and the barriers of culture and language, and knowledge of the local, even geography and local communications, makes it very difficult for these folks from isolation to let anybody know their plight. One of the reasons that's so important to recognize is because we hear a lot of talk on the sex trafficking sides about the signs of sex trafficking, and those are a little easier in some ways to see, although that's challenging too, simply because there are certain places and certain modalities where you can be looking for these signs. But one of the most prominent signs that we want people to know is if they see people who are working and living in isolated conditions, are kept away from other people, that's a sign. If on top of that, it looks like there's somebody else who's watching them all the time, that's a signal. Dangerous, overcrowded conditions for living quarters that are kind of company owned, they're provided by the employer. That's another kind of thing. And interestingly, one of the best objective things is if you see workers who are working without safety, proper safety equipment, that's also a sign that could be a trafficking situation. We want people to know what to look for, and candidly call the hotline if you see something. Call local law enforcement. Give somebody a chance to look into it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Attorney General Host. I'm very happy, and I think all the our victims and survivors who are watching today, I think they'll get a lot of power that Attorney General is concerned in uplifting and rescuing the victims and survivors. Because there's always a wrong perception by the perpetrators to the victims, especially labor trafficking. They use 4 words to the immigrants. I'll get you arrested, I'll get you handcuffed, I'll get you jailed, I'll get you deported. And they think that like Attorney General or law enforcement agencies are coming behind them. And you speaking and saying that, no, you're here to rescue them and help them and prosecute. See, when you save one victim, you save one survivor. But when you prosecute one perpetrator, you save 100 victims. So having said that, sir, I just want to share with all the audience today that many times people ask me, hey, come on, what can I do, Harold, for your organization, like Eyes Open International? And I just want to share one small example, sir, that a common community member, an American, a layman, can contribute, because it is not it's a teamwork. Like I always say, teamwork makes the dream work. I alone and the law enforcement agents alone cannot stop this. We need the entire family into this, or everybody involved in this. So this is how I just want to share, we have Yvan Demosthenes, he is a CEO of HD, and we just met, and how he's contributing to strengthen the power and uplift the survivors. So I just want to share with all the audience that how one can get engaged in this program of rescuing all the victims and prosecuting the perpetrators. Yes, Yvan, please welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Harold, and Attorney General. Thank you for your words. I was wondering while I was sitting here listening to you. Hey, what can we do? How can we look out? How can we recognize these things? So, you literally just gave me some fuel or some ammunition, and I'll be looking out for those things as well. So. And Harold, thank you. I just try to do whatever I can do and find the opportunities to contribute. And so it's my pleasure to do that whenever possible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yvan. And Attorney General Host, I think before it's like 10:26, I have got 4 minutes with you. So is that something like you'd like to share with your victims or survivors in Ohio and nationally and internationally, that you as an Attorney General, that you're the head, you're not here to prosecute them or to deport them, and at the same breath that to the traffickers or perpetrators, that you are there to basically ensure that the traffickers they get prosecuted, but they do not go free. So I wanted to share something to our victims. The victims are psychologically very scared on this subject.
Well, first of all, I haven't met anybody who would want to prosecute a victim of labor human trafficking. I suppose there might be somebody out there, but I can assure you it's nobody in my office. And in all the interactions I've had across the country with colleagues, they don't want to prosecute you. They want to prosecute the person who's holding you. These are difficult cases. There's a lot of moving parts, and frequently evidence and witnesses are lacking. But we try, and we are dogged in our investigations. And we do see convictions of the traffickers. I'd like to see more. But to the vast majority of the people that are watching here today, here's what I want to say to our broader audience. You mustn't give up hope. We need you to be part of this. I heard an old story once about a man who saw another man walking on the beach by the ocean after high tide had gone out, and there were tens of thousands of starfish washed up on the beach, all baking in the sun. They were all going to die, and the other man was picking them up one at a time and tossing them back into the sea. The other man looked at him and said, "You're doing an impossible thing. You cannot look at this. There's tens of thousands that need rescued. You'll never get them all. You're not going to make a difference." And the other man reached down, picked up another starfish and threw him back to safety in the water and said, "I made a difference for that one." A lot of times when we see a huge systemic evil like human trafficking, we begin to despair that we can do anything. But collectively, if we are each throwing one back into the ocean, over time, we do have an impact. The greatest triumph begins with the first small act, And we need everybody in this fight. Understand what it looks like. Look for the warning signs. And don't be afraid to see what you see, or to pick up the phone, or to send an email, so that someone in authority can try to take action. It's going to take all of us.
That's very, very powerful. And audience, if you're watching this globally, I want to share one thing, that what Attorney General Dave Host said, he's not only preaching, but he's practicing that. And I'm a living example of what he has done. About one of the starfish, he has gone and rescued me. I don't know, many delegates, sir, like Gina Cavallo, who's in New Jersey. She's a survivor of sex trafficking. She loves and respects you. I did a program with them last week, and she was talking about you. And I was so touched. So that's very nice. So just on the end, the last note, sir. It's already time for you to go. I know every second is very important about yours. But I want you to share on 3F. You're a father. You're like a family member, and like you're a friend to like the victim survivors. How do you balance all this? But I don't know, you would like to share something about your family. I heard that your daughter, is very passionate, and she does something on human trafficking. This is what I heard. And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing about yourself, about your family, like how you all are working passionately on human trafficking, like on sex and labor trafficking. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm very proud of my daughter. She runs the court docket, the specialized court docket for human trafficking, and probably is most responsible for educating this old man about what's happening out there. Although certainly there's a lot of other people that have helped me with that. But thank you for raising her in our conversation. I'm very proud of her, and she's picking starfish up by the bunch.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate that. And God bless America. Vande Mataram. And thank you for joining and partnering with Eyes Open International. We all love you. And any parting words in the end you have to tell our audience globally? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Harold. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Preeti, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General, for that insightful and informative conversation. It was indeed the requirement for this current time. So, viewers, let's move on with our discussion with the rest of the panel members. Yeah, they are here now. Awesome. So, welcome back, everyone. Okay. Ms. Carol, just now, like Attorney General, when he spoke, he was talking about the indications of labor trafficking. So could you explain us, like, what are the possible indicators of labor trafficking so that people know, or anyone, even from a third person, they know that, like, that person is in danger of labor trafficking?
Well, and the Attorney General, of course, did a wonderful job explaining what some of the indicators are. So I do this all the time. I follow in his footsteps, and he does a great job. So some of the indicators you need to look for are they being kept away? Are the people you suspect might be victims being kept away from other people? Are they always being watched? Is there someone always there taking care of them? The AG mentioned dangerous, overcrowded situations, but it also might be, and I was just reading this about a person in a situation very similar to what Harold had to deal with. A young woman working in a restaurant. She was working 16 to 18 hours a day. And a number of people came forward and said, we thought we maybe should have said something because we saw her there at all the different shifts, but nobody did anything until finally someone said, yeah, this doesn't seem right. And in a lot of situations, are they being adequately protected with the safety equipment that's required? So there's any number of factors. And the very interesting situation, I'm a girl, I get my nails done every 3 weeks, and I go into my nail salon, and almost all of the providers, the techs are Asian. I engage them in conversation. I ask where they're from, and I'm always in the back of my mind thinking, is there a situation here? I don't think so. Otherwise, I would be reporting it. They are very, very much able to come and go as they please. But just keeping your eyes open, like Harold's organization, keeping your eyes open, looking at the situation, and something that just strikes you as wrong, take that moment and report it.
Yes, definitely. That indeed a good explanation for that. So, in general, like from public perspective, if you see, human smuggling and human trafficking, they go hand in hand, and there is always a confusion between them. And are they really related, or are they different, or what exactly do they mean? So, if any of you could explain to me that.
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Jen jump in. We actually we were with the AG down in the border in Texas. And there is while there is a clear delineation between smuggling and trafficking, they sometimes intertwine. Smuggling is generally when someone is trying to get to another country and they're willing to pay others to bring them in. That's a voluntary situation. They've paid the money, they've asked to come in. And then once they come to the United States, they generally do not have a lot of contact with the smugglers unless they owe the money. Human trafficking can start with smuggling. It doesn't have to start with smuggling. It can come with people who are coming to the United States legally. And somehow that whole quest of the victim is perverted into the human trafficking situation, where they're stuck in a situation that they can't get out, either because of an, quote, owed debt that they have to work off, or being held in isolation. And what we know is that a lot of folks who are being trafficked are being brought through that Mexican border, along the border states, and then dispersed throughout the country. So Jen, if you want to add.
Yeah, I think that it also ties into some of the things that Harold has always been talking about and that he brought up at the beginning of the podcast is that, yeah, Harold's absolutely correct that smuggling is its own offense, and people are brought here, and the crime part is that they're avoiding immigration laws. And so that in and of itself is a crime and often is what's charged because it's much easier to prove. But then the act of violating the immigration laws is then used by traffickers in addition to the debt that Carol mentioned. That's used as a means of power and control. And that's used sort of as the weapon against the people that they've brought, which then can make them much easier to traffic. So, the cornerstone of trafficking is vulnerabilities. And so when you have someone that's brought in through smuggling, you have a whole host of a whole host of vulnerabilities. And the smuggling aspect or the lack of proper documentation is just one of those things that can be exploited very easily.
So, with respect to that exploitation, right? Like, what are the other vulnerabilities you see? Like, one is like immigration status, and few they have this problem for housing. And is there any other thing which you could let us say? Like,
there's quite a few other vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. When you come to the United States from another country, you may not be familiar with the language. You may or may not be. I know that internationally, a lot more people speak English than we speak other languages, but it's still new. It's still different. So you have a language barrier. You have a knowledge barrier. You just don't know your way around the community that you come to, and so you're reliant upon others to help you. You have you don't have the knowledge of where you need to go to get assistance. Even if you've come to the country legally, you may have that fear of authorities. So if something happens to you, you say, I'm not going to the police because in my country, if I went to the police, it didn't matter if I was in the right, it wasn't going to work out well for me. So you have that vulnerability also. If you have children, you have the vulnerability of how can I protect my children? There are so many vulnerabilities when you come to this country. And I know traveling internationally, how uncomfortable I feel when I'm in a different country and I'm going to be doing something new. It's just the whole idea of coming someplace that you don't know. And how do you get a job if you don't speak the language well? So if you don't have a job, how do you pay for things? The vulnerabilities can be overwhelming, and anyone who comes to the United States to start a new life and succeed are phenomenally strong people. So
Definitely. Awesome. Yeah. So, Harold, this is for you. In general, if we see when an opportunity is posted out, human beings, their nature is like to grab that opportunity and they don't see what's behind that, or they do not go in detail about what is happening behind them. So, but we really know that the traffickers use this as a mechanism and exploit them. So, is it resonating with your story, Harold? And would you like to add some points here?
Yeah, this is a very $1 million question, like what Carol and Jen said. Like when you say about smuggling, they say, okay, even the Attorney General said, day host, that they paid $10,000. But see, you have to understand that it's voluntary. I agree. Right? See, I also came on an H-1B visa, but on a $75,000 salary, but I was manipulated, tricked, and trapped. So same way in case of smuggling also, or labor trafficking, these people are given a very rosy picture. Oh, we'll take you very smoothly. You pay $10,000. You'll record that money in like 3 months. But I met just recently, just 2 weeks back, one guy, Guatemala, Mexican. He's from Guatemala. He was 19 years old when he came. He paid a lot of money, and he was conversing with me on the phone, like he'll speak in Mexico, and that will translate into English. But I was so touched, I was in tears. We spent time because I had to fill that form with him. And he told me, Harold, in his own language, that had I known this, I would have not come. Well, I would have died. He said, I would have died. He got saved multiple times. Well, he would have died. Snake bites, this, that. There was no water. Well, I had only so much water. And people are trying to steal from me. And he went through hell. It took him something like 44 days to reach from Guatemala to the US. And some people didn't make it. So, like what he said, that's the reason I'm trying to do this show. Like what we're trying to do this podcast, and what Attorney General Yost is here. We have Yvan, we have Jen and Carol. Is that to tell our audience, America is a good country. It's heaven. People always say in India, Carol and Jen, going to America is like going to Swarg. Swarg means heaven. Here today. So which is a fact, and that's it. So yeah, it happens because there is, like you said, the law in those countries are different, and there is so much instability politically. So people are scared, especially can you believe during the pandemic, Carol and Jen and Yvan, that people are telling me from India, Harold, I have to come to the US. Yep. Things are very bad here. I said, no, you can't come. There is lockdown. But no, we just want to come because see, they don't get stimulus package. See, here we are blessed. Yes. This country, I respect this country a lot. We many times take it for granted, but we got good air to breathe. There is food, there is shelter, there is clothing. So that's the reason many people want to come here. So it's a fact. America is heaven. Thank you.
Yeah. May I say something, Harold? Thanks.
Yes, definitely.
So, Carol and Jen, thank you, because when I heard Harold's story, these things happen. And Carol, to your point, you're going on a Saturday afternoon, getting your nails done, or going somewhere to eat. You always think these types of things are happening somewhere else, in LA, Arizona, Texas, right? For it to happen here in Cincinnati, if it can happen in Cincinnati, Ohio, where we think we've got it pretty good, there's no real world problems going on here. Right. And it's happening under our noses. What if it can happen here, then it can happen anywhere. So I love when you say you keep your eyes open. You're although you're chatting and enjoying yourself, you always have a little bit in the back of your mind, making sure that there aren't those indicators. And I enjoy hearing how we can make sure and continue to keep our eyes open so we can identify these indicators when they happen and continue the awareness. In just a short time, even myself, as I'm learning, I try to bring awareness to what Harold's doing about the situation, and people are coming back to me, and I say, hey, go to their website. They have places and resources to go to as well, and share more information about what's going on. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Carol.
You say, if I may, one of the things that we need to start doing is getting rid of this idea that it's always going to be like the Marion Egg Farm or a huge ring like that. It could be a one-off, like I think you just had in Cincinnati, and my stepson was just telling me about an issue they had in DC at one of the embassies. It could just be one person. And I don't know about you, Yvan, but Jen and I definitely, whenever we go out, it changes your way of thinking once you start working in this area. And every place you go, you look and go, I wonder. And so you start sort of interrogating people nicely, but interrogating them but to make sure you're not contributing to the problem.
Right.
I was thinking the same thing, Carol, when you said that. And, just for frame of reference, Carol and I are both have a history of prosecuting crimes and a variety of crimes. And I think that's our suspicious prosecutor nature. We always sort of look at things. I call it my side eye, like what's really going on here? I'm inherently a little more suspicious, I think. But I think, Yvan, you raised a really excellent point that, and it ties in well with what Harold's talking about the United States being heaven. It's like, well, I agree. We have a lot of wonderful things and a lot of advantages here, but we need to make sure that doesn't overshadow and keep us from not looking and being aware, because trafficking is happening throughout America. It's happening throughout Ohio, and it impacts both our international people that come here, our international friends that travel here, but it also impacts American citizens, and it's just going to look different in different parts of the state and different parts of the country, much like it's going to look different in different parts of the world. So we just have to learn and keep learning and keep watching and keep being suspicious, like Carol and I are all the time.
Well, I for one appreciate your side eye. So don't change a thing.
But not everybody does, so thank you.
So Ivan, what do you think are the difficulties or challenges in reaching out the victims? What do you see as the challenges in that?
Jen, I'll let you start because I started the last two answers.
I think in terms of the challenges in reaching there's a lot. Let me see if I can't capture a few of them. I think one of the biggest issues is that working itself is not an illegal activity, right? And so we have such a huge focus on sex trafficking. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that it's a lot easier to identify because the act of selling sex for money or something of value is inherently illegal. So you can see that, you can intervene a lot easier in that regard. And I do think that a lot of our resources are so focused on that because of that inherent illegal nature. And so I think that just having more access, more understanding, having more people like Harold that are willing to come forward, I think that's a huge issue as well, because even if people came to the United States through legal means, perhaps their documentation has expired. Perhaps their trafficker has a hold of their documentation. Perhaps their trafficker is doing any host of other things to exploit them. Then, they're not coming forward. They're afraid to come forward, and we aren't interacting with them as frequently because it's not an illegal act to work. And I think there are other aspects of trafficking, labor trafficking, that we just don't understand yet. I think it's still our knowledge. We have to keep in mind that, at least in Ohio, our trafficking statute went into effect in 2010. So when you compare that to other crimes and other statutes, it's relatively new. And I can tell you that I've been working on them for since maybe 2012. So not too long after the law went into effect. And I feel like just now are we really starting to get a grasp on how to appropriately handle some forms of trafficking. And so I think, we still have a long ways to go, but we need people to educate us too about their own experiences so we can better know what to look for.
And one of the other challenges I see is that people say, why it's sort of like the old domestic violence challenges. Why don't they just leave? They can just walk out the door. There's nothing stopping them. What's the problem? And the problems are many and varied, and we just have to educate. Maybe we start with our prosecutors and law enforcement, and then move out to the citizenry as a whole. But it again revolves around educating those who have the ability to do something about it.
Mr. Demosthenes, you want to add? Yeah, I was looking for you actually.
Yes, Carol, I love that you said that, because we had that conversation yesterday as we're learning and becoming more knowledgeable. It struck me as being very similar to the domestic issue, the domestic violence, and that possibly being a model to provide assistance, awareness, support for individuals that are trapped, right? So I appreciate you saying that, because we chatted for maybe about 20 minutes about that.
So, Mr. Demosthenes, since you're part of this recruiting team, right? Like what you do for companies, how do you see the legal bonds which the company put on the employee? Like, do you think that is kind of ending as one of the criteria for labor trafficking, or do you still think, what are your opinions on that legal bond which the companies put?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit more discovery on that. You need to look into it, because there's definitely some influence, and it's definitely a potential contributor. I mean, we have one thing I share with my clients and people in general is that even without a pandemic, there are not enough people in this country to support the economy in itself for all the work and the positions we have. So when you see that they're part of this is, putting people in back rooms to work, or an opportunity, or in the fields where they talked about those young kids in the previous stories. So yeah, that's definitely something we need to look into more, because of the labor shortage that we have here in general. I think that's something that should be discovered.
Awesome. Okay. So we have been talking about victims, right? Like, I want to put up a point on the survivors. So as a survivor, what would be the needs post, like they have come out and they are like out of that toxic thing and they're out, and what would be the needs to start their life again? Or have you identified like how we can help them, or just your thoughts on that?
Wow.
I mean, anyone like.
Wow. Well, Harold identified one: shelter. They have to have some place to live. They have to have some place to put their heads at night and sleep, and know that they're not in danger. They're going to need legal assistance, maybe medical assistance, depending on what the situations were. They're going to need a job. They're going to need transportation. Jen, jump in.
Yeah, I also think that something that's overlooked and has different kind of baggage in different cultures is the need for counseling too, right? So there's a lot of layers to trafficking, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, but I think it's much more accepted or known that if you have been in a sex trafficking situation, you're going to need counseling. However, I think that it's equally important for our labor trafficking victims to get counseling as well, because they may have experienced violence. They've definitely been manipulated. They definitely have undergone trauma on a daily basis. And that kind of trauma over and over and over again can have a tremendous impact on somebody and can actually lead to other physical ailments and physical issues. And so really addressing some of that underlying trauma and unpacking it so that they can then continue to live healthy, long lives. And I know that not just in other countries, but even in some places here in the United States, we talked about my side eye. Counseling gets the side eye, or like, I don't need that, or it's considered shameful, or it's seen as a sign of weakness. And I think that continuing to have conversations about how caring for your mental health, whether it's those of us working in the field or just your average citizen or those who have undergone a trauma, that addressing your mental health is not shameful, and in fact is a sign of courage and strength.
Yes. But yeah, Mr. Harold, yes.
I just want to add what Carol and Jen said, and I want them to answer some of this question of the victims and survivors, not about me, but of all the victims and survivors in the United States of America. Number one, what you said is very true. Counseling is a must, because trauma has no expiration date, number one. Number two, I think they need medical attention, like especially victims of labor trafficking or sex trafficking. They get 4 things complimentary. One is diabetes, dental, vision, and blood pressure. So they do not know, but they have it. But coming down to the point, Jen and Carol, please can you educate our audience in Ohio, in US, and globally on continued presence status, that how they have that benefit, like I'm talking for the immigrants, number one. Number two, the T visa. I've been told it's very, very complicated, and I think Jen will be in a better position. They say that many times if the victims do not apply for T visa, they say something goes wrong, they get deported. Now, I don't know, you will be in a better position to answer that. And third is the U visa. The U visa cap is 10,000 per year, but the wait period is 10 years. So how is a victim or survivor sustained? Because he needs an employment authorization on that. So can you share some lights on that, please? Thank you.
So I think that ties into Carol's point about the need for potential legal representation for some of those things that you're talking about, Harold. You need to have, it's so layered, and we still have a lot of work to do in this area. So you need to make sure that your law enforcement and your prosecutors are educated in continued presence. So continued presence is something that law enforcement prosecution can seek, which allows our victims to stay in the United States during the pendency of a case. And there's certain things we have to do, and I usually have people help me with them, so I'm not going to be able to go through all of those steps if I'm being completely honest here. And then once they've cooperated with the case, they could be eligible for a U visa or a T visa, which the T visa is specific to trafficking victims. The U visa applies to other kind of crimes. I would see that frequently with some of the other offenses that I prosecuted when I was with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in Columbus, Ohio. But again, you need somebody to help guide them through that. And those are things that law enforcement, prosecution, our non-governmental agencies, and some of our legal groups. For example, we have a group called Advocating Opportunity here in Ohio. And I know that other similar places exist throughout the United States, and they'll help walk people through that. They'll assist people. There's even solo practitioners, attorneys who work on their own that will assist people. Our legal aid groups will assist people in filling out the forms, communicating with the right people, getting it to the right people, and walking that through. So I think that those are important tools for our trafficking victims to know that even if you're not here by legal means or your documentation has expired, those are not going to be barriers to getting assistance from us. There are just certain legal things we need to do to ensure that deportation doesn't happen.
So to add to Jennifer's whatever she has spoke now. So when we say like survivors, when they don't during the process of coming out as a survivor, sometimes the court sees the survivor as the accountable for some of the crimes related to whatever the trafficking has happened, and they get arrested. So we know that courts, they have the duty to hold the offenders accountable, but still, is there any mechanism for the courts to, in order to connect the survivors to support and assistance what they need and what they require? So does court have any mechanism right now or in the process of doing it?
So Jen and I were having that discussion a little bit earlier while we were back in the staging area about in Ohio, the law is specifically directed towards victims of the sex trafficking. So, and we were talking about changing the predicates. And Jen has had a lot of input and a lot of conversation with the legislators and our legislative group. So I'm going to let her answer that again.
Well, and I think that so there's different, again, you guys are asking these really great multi-layered questions. So I'm just going to keep on talking. So the first layer is making sure that if we have people that have been victimized, that have been arrested, that we have this level of education for our law enforcement and our prosecutors and how to appropriately deal with that. So when is arrest appropriate? Is it ever appropriate? What do you do if they're arrested? Are there services or programs that can be used through the court system to assist people? And also as a prosecutor, I was almost always working with trafficking victims that had committed some sort of crime during the course of their trafficking. Mm-hmm. What I always let them know was, while I certainly can't endorse violating the law, what I'm concerned about is holding the trafficker accountable. And so I don't want anybody to ever be afraid to tell me as a prosecutor their entire story or their entire history, because often the act of that criminal behavior, that criminal offense, is then used by the trafficker as a point of exploitation. So tell me that information. I'm not coming after you for that, right? I'm going to go after the trafficker and demonstrate how they used that. And then once we get to the point that if there is a conviction, Carol's absolutely right. Ohio does have an expungement statute that permits a wide range of offenses to be expunged or removed from trafficking victims' records. We do currently have a hurdle in that they have to have been convicted of what Carol referred to as a predicate offense, which is typically something like soliciting or loitering for solicitation, which is related to sex trafficking. And I believe Harold raised that earlier in that often excludes our labor trafficking victims. And so I know that hurdle is something that we are aware of, and it is something that the legislature's aware of, and we are looking towards ways that we can modify that. And I just, I can't get into a ton of it because I don't know how far into it everybody is, but just please know we're aware of it. We're working on it. And we certainly don't want a law that's intended to assist our trafficking victims to provide an obstacle for others. So we're working on it.
That's a great relief to the victims, right? Like what you spoke, Nam, and that's awesome. Yeah. Yes, Harold. Yeah. I
just want to share Jen and Carol and Yvan to the audience in Ohio, nationally, especially in the United States of America, and especially to the immigrants. Like in case you all three go to a restaurant, to an Indian restaurant or to a Nepali restaurant or to any Mexican restaurant for lunch. And then somebody comes and tells you, those people are illegal working here. So what is going to be a reaction? Are you like people think that you're going to get them arrested or get them deported? That's the first feeling they have. And once, if the victim who's serving you and by design or default comes to know, oh my God, that's Carol at the Attorney General's office. And she's a Deputy Attorney General of Law Enforcement. And that's Jen, they're going to panic and they will ma'am, this is a fact.
Definitely.
So what would be your reaction? I want the audience or the victims to know that if okay, he or she is undocumented, illegal, doesn't have anything, but not a criminal. Okay. What would you do? I'm not good. I want to know your exact reaction and action.
Well, I think the first thing I would do is call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number.
Fantastic.
That's scrolling underneath me now. Now that I know that one exists, I would probably call that or 911. Let somebody know for me.
Well, and I'm going to take Harold's question and sort of parse it out a little bit. So you have two issues there. One, you may have someone who is in the country illegally, but on the second, they may be a victim of trafficking, but they may not be. So if you make the assumption they're a victim of trafficking, it makes a lot of sense to call the hotline. And I'm probably getting myself in trouble here. I don't assume I ever know someone's status. That is not my decision to make in a situation like that. So my thought would be, if I think that a company has a number of employees, or even an employee who's an illegal, I have a duty as a officer of the court to make that known to law enforcement. At the same time, it makes a lot of sense to call the hotline, because if they have a lot, they might be in a situation where they are being trafficked. But Jen and I are in a really difficult position, because we have a duty as officers of the court to uphold the law. So it makes sense for us to do both. We would probably refer it to law enforcement, which honestly, most of the time, nothing happens because they are overwhelmed. And then also contact the victim, the hotline, which makes it, and just say, hey, we think there might be some issues here.
Yeah, Mr. Yvan. Yeah.
Yeah, Carol, you make a interesting point. This whole time I've been assuming that we're talking about immigrants or people trying to get into the country. How often or how prevalent is it for even citizens, current U.S. citizens, to be trafficked?
All the time.
All the time?
All the time. And Carol, the question was directed to you, and I just jumped right in. So I'll let you.
I like it.
I say this because it gets back to our point about still needing to do some work in investigating and prosecuting labor trafficking cases. But as I mentioned, I've been handling these cases for quite a while now, both at the state and the federal level. And I had one case where the victims were not United States citizens. And that same case, they were not from Ohio. All of my other cases have involved victims that are primarily from the state of Ohio and United States, Ohio citizens. And I recognize that not every victim of trafficking ends up in a courtroom and is not prepared to or ready to, or that there are different paths for different victims. But I think that my experience in the courtroom is not unusual, and that it is an issue that impacts everybody. It's a human issue. It's not a location specific issue.
And if you remember, the crux of human trafficking is exploiting vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. And while we see it a lot in the folks who are immigrating to the U.S., we also have U.S. citizens who are very vulnerable and fall into those situations.
I just totally what Yvan said, Carol and Jen, that there are many Americans, because I've seen in the Ohio during the pandemic that many Americans, I'm sure shocked, do not know their human rights, and they get exploited in labor trafficking. So that happens very much in Ohio also, So once you educate them about their human rights and what they can do, because they are at times very ignorant. So it does happen to American citizens also in labor trafficking. Thank you.
So to add to Ivan's question, in what sectors, what work sectors you see this trafficking more, and also is there any pattern which these traffickers follow, for a particular work sector, or is there any mechanism or any pattern they follow? Have you encountered such things? Anyone Jen, Carol? I'm not sure whom to ask exactly, so I just posted it out here.
So I think you see it a lot in areas, of course, your illicit massage businesses. You see it a lot in nail salons, those types of beauty salons. You'll see it a lot in home services like nannies, domestics, hotels. Though to be fair, the hotels are doing a lot to address that issue. They've started banding together and trying to make sure that they're not contributing to the problem. Jen?
Yeah, so you'll also see it in agriculture.
Yes.
And you'll see it in construction as well. Construction often involves many layers of contractors and subcontractors, and obviously the person with the lowest bid frequently wins the project. And, in order to have the lowest bid, you need to have low costs, and labor is obviously a cost. And so you'll see that there. And at least for us in Ohio, it seems like there's always construction of some sort going on, no matter the season, no matter the location. And so I think all of those, at least here in Ohio, are some of our most prevalent, and also restaurants. I have to admit that I had a case that I tried that was a sexual assault case, and this young woman's family owned a restaurant, and she would talk about how one of the questions I frequently ask is, tell me about who lived in your house. And it was her and her family. And then there was always an employee that slept on a mattress, or didn't really have a room, slept here, but really only used the house to sleep, because the rest of the time was working at the restaurant. And it would cycle through, maybe the employee would only be there for a few months, and then there'd be a new employee. And looking back, I should have asked more questions. And so I think that it's even happening on a smaller scale too. In these smaller, we talk about these big industries, but you could have smaller pockets in those industries too. And especially the home environment that Carol mentioned, that's even more difficult to see and interact with.
Okay. So recently we had this issue for the R visa status people, right? Like in New Jersey, we had this incident. So what's your input on that case, and how you see this R visa people getting into this labor trafficking?
Are you talking about, Harold, is this the case with the mosque in New Jersey?
Yeah, where they're paying $1 per hour, R1
Yes.
visa. And that is what I said to educate people back in India. See, this is what happens. Yes, please, Carol.
Yeah, and I am going to say that I really don't know a lot about that, but I know what I know is what Harold told me, because I thought I'm going to go look that up, and then of course I haven't had the opportunity to, and I apologize. But anytime you see something like that, and in that instance, I think that they were exploiting the fact that you had folks who wanted to come in and they thought they were helping a worthy cause and were going to be paid, and instead they became trafficking victims, paying $1 an hour. You know what? I did look up some stuff on this, because the religious group, was it Muslims? Was it for a mosque?
They're a different culture, like they're from a lower caste. That's what was put there. But
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you. And I think they thought that they were going to be doing the right thing. And of course, the members of organization that were paying them or hired these people deny all the allegations, which is not surprising. So if it did happen, hopefully it will go through the courts, and the end will be just. And I say if it did happen, because we still have to wait and see. It's not unusual for people sometimes to not tell the truth, unfortunately. And that hurts us all the time in terms of prosecuting these things. But if it did happen, hopefully the justice system will see it through, and we can help those folks who were trafficked.
I can see, if I understand correctly, that's a type of visa that's typically associated with or tied to a religious kind of system and tied to a nonprofit. And so I can see how someone coming to the United States would think that that's a little bit more inherently reliable, right? Like, they're good people, it's religious, it's a nonprofit, I'm going to be safe. And I can see how, at least on a personal level, I would think, oh, well, of course, that's going to be, a great way to come over, and I'm going to be at much less risk. Like, I know there are risks, but surely not with this. And I think that's a good example of making sure that you investigate, you're cautious, you pay attention, you ask questions, and speak up, so yeah.
And you layer it on top of that, when people read it in the newspaper, the inclination is to believe the religious organization, and not these people who came over from India. Was it India?
Yes.
who just wanted to come over here and now they're over here and they're not happy with what they bargained for. There is always, well, maybe not so much anymore, but the inclination is to believe your nonprofits are not going to cheat somebody. Even, we would look at it and go, oh, now Jen and I would look at it and go, yeah, that probably happened. But your average citizen is going to look at it and say, but it's a church, but it's a not for profit or non, and they're good people, and they wouldn't do this. So there's that double whammy that they come over and they're in this situation, and then no one's going to believe them because the church is a good thing or the religious organization is a good thing, and they're a not for profit, and they just wouldn't do that.
So having touched that subject, Carol and Jen, like say in Ohio, somebody is going through that situation who has come in legally, maybe on a domestic servitude or maybe on H-1B visa, but is going through exploitation in Ohio, I'm just saying, and could be a male guy. Now, in case he calls maybe to you, Jen, or to the law enforcement agency, will he get protection and will he get security, stability, and shelter? Like that is the biggest challenge. Do you think that will he get
Before you answer, like I'd like to add to that point, like what happens when a victim just called an hotline number? Like what are the post steps like that happens to him? Like that, if we could explain that like to the audience, and it'll be like more of an awareness to everyone here.
So when a tip comes in to the hotline, whether it's through a victim or a citizen, the hotline is a national hotline. So then they find the region, if possible, we'll say in Ohio, and they have different points of contact that they will then send that tip to. So, and it might be a nonprofit, it might be law enforcement, but typically then whoever gets the tip has a procedure in place, and will hopefully notify law enforcement. I know in Central Ohio, that's how that works. And then what happens next depends largely on how the victim wants to proceed. So law enforcement can reach out, but is it going to be safe for the victim to speak out at that point? Will they feel comfortable? Will they feel comfortable speaking with law enforcement? And if not, then the non-governmental agencies can assist. Here in Ohio, at least in Central Ohio, our Salvation Army has case management services for people that don't go through the law enforcement route or don't go through that means if necessary, and can still provide services. So I want to be clear that that law enforcement is not a necessary step. However, it might be if you're talking about needing status and visas and things like that. If law enforcement gets involved, they're going to investigate, and investigation can take a long time. And so that's where those additional services, the safety, the housing and things like that really come into play. I will tell you that trafficking cases in general take so much longer to investigate than, let's say I'm at the grocery store and somebody strikes me and steals my purse. They rob me. Well, that's a one-time event that is relatively easy to investigate. Trafficking involves so many layers. It's usually a long-term event. There's a lot of things to uncover, and that can take time. And then it's going to take time to work its way through the court system. So victims are going to have to understand that, be patient, and sort of, ask questions along the way too, to make sure that they're being heard, and that their questions are being answered, and that they're not being forgotten. Because a lot of times I will tell you that if I was working on a case, I may not always update the victim if it was just like, I've been working on it and reading things for a while, or we don't have a court date for 6 weeks, but I'm always happy to answer a phone call. And I think that can be hard sometimes too, then kind of being assertive and asking questions. And so then what would happen is it could work its way through the court system and hopefully result in a conviction. But we do still need to work on and improve our services, our shelter. We do have some really great things in Ohio, but all of those things are gaps still as well. And I will say that some of the funding has been cut that helps support a lot of those places. And so that's why you'll see a lot of the agencies asking for more VOCA funding or an increase in funding and things like that. So as a society, we need to place more importance on funding and assisting our survivors too.
And
Because
with
sometimes, yeah.
with the survivors, there's a lot of hurdles and for law enforcement. So in the human trafficking case we handled in Delaware County, we had 9 women. Jen knows, she actually handled the prosecution, but they all spoke a different dialect of a Chinese language.
Mandarin.
So someone had to be hired to be able to translate for them. But some of them spoke some English, not a whole lot. And so anything that was complicated or difficult, we had to hire interpreters, and they're not cheap, but we did it. And it kind of busted the budget in Franklin County or in Delaware County for that court case. But so that's a hurdle. I think we do a good job in Central Ohio with offering services, but sometimes we still have to get over that distrust of law enforcement and the establishment that the victims may have.
Yeah, Mr. Yvan. Yeah.
You're muted.
You're muted. I will.
Sorry, guys. For those that think that they may be witnessing or identify an indicator when they call into the hotline, is there any anonymity? Are they can they feel like they can call in and be open on what they're seeing? But what's the involvement after that? Can they be anonymous, or what does that look like?
Jen, go ahead.
Yes. It's my understanding they can report anonymously. You can also contact local law enforcement anonymously as well, too. Those tips come in all the time in terms of anonymous, no ability to follow up, that kind of thing. But you can also report and be identified, and then law enforcement may potentially want to speak with you about what you've seen, why you thought it was suspicious. So there are a lot of available options for people when they call in.
And I listened yesterday. I actually sat down and listened to about a 20-minute interview with someone about what happens when you call the hotline. It's helpful for those of your audience who might want to listen to that. You go to the national, the hotline, just the hotline website, and you can pull up. This is what happens when you call the website or when you call the hotline. This is how we handle it, and it's very interesting, and it's very helpful. It just gives you the process and the procedure that they use.
Oh, great.
So the website for that would be the Polaris Project.
Yes,
the Polaris Project. Okay, sounds good. So, Mr. Yvan, do you want to discuss about anything like the post consequences of victim reporting? So what do you think victims feel after they have reported? Are they going to feel threatened, or do you think what kind of things they can undergo? What's your input on
that? so when Jen, I'm going to come to you, but I do want to add that what we see a lot of times is we don't get a lot of cooperation from the victims if it's an outside reporter at the outset because of the fear. So, for example, someone will report to law enforcement that this person's been a victim, and if law enforcement tries to talk to the victim, they won't respond. When we went in, and this was on our sex trafficking, which actually had a labor trafficking component in it. A lot of it was a labor trafficking component. They almost absolutely refused to talk to us. It took a lot of care, one-on-one time with them, with our victim advocates and our prosecutors and our law enforcement, who were absolutely phenomenal. Hats off to those guys. That was our human trafficking group, mainly Powell Police Department, but our human trafficking group. And victims generally, if they are not self-reporting, they are not very cooperative because they just don't know what's going to happen. I have not seen anyone who self-reported? Jen, you may have. Do you have any?
I think I have, not in a labor trafficking case, but in a sex trafficking case. Some of them, if they have been, it's rare for them to make a call on their own to report. But if they interact with law enforcement through some sort of sting, or through some sort of other means, they might self-report. But that is still rare. Yeah, that is still rare. And as for the feelings that someone might feel, I think Harold's probably best suited to answer that question. But from the people that I've worked with, I think that in the public, there's this misperception, and some of that is because we use words like rescued and things like that. I think there is relief, but I also think there's fear. I think there's uncertainty. I think there's doubt. I think there's anger. I think that there's a whole host of feelings, and they might come and go. And at different times, you might feel all of them at once. With our sex trafficking victims, sometimes there's still an amount of love or care for the trafficker due to some trauma bonding. And I would imagine that depending on the labor trafficking scenario, that there could still be an amount of that, care, or especially in more of the home settings or the more isolated settings, not this kind of bigger corporate or construction, those kind of fields, because we do see families traffic each other too, whether it's sex or labor. And so you're going to have all these conflicting feelings, and I think that can be very confusing too. So there's going to be a feeling of confusion, and I personally I can't imagine going through all of that. And I know from speaking with my victims, it can all be very overwhelming.
Well, and you have the added layer that if they're being trafficked with a group of other people, they have an allegiance to those other people. So then they have that concern: how is my coming forward going to affect the people I'm leaving behind? It just overwhelming is how they feel. I am sure they feel totally overwhelmed.
For most of the victims in labor trafficking, if you see, the main concern is the, for example, immigration documents or the passport. All these things have been captured by the traffickers. So I think we have to emphasize on the fact that how important it for a labor to keep his documents with himself. So that is the major fear. Sometimes they see that I'm out of immigration status, or I'm ending up in getting arrested, and all these cases we have seen with the victims, right? So Mr. Harold, would you share about your story regarding this documents, how do the traffickers keep all the documents with them, or how do the victims react to that?
Yeah, out of 10, all that, especially in foreign nationals, yeah, they keep the documentation. They have the entire control, and they, in my case also, I didn't know what was an SSN. My SSN was with him. I had no clue. So see how after being so educated from India, but when you come to a different country, like Carol said, when she goes to a different country, vice versa, you're totally lost because you don't know the culture, you don't know the people. I didn't know how this country operates. So people like this, victims or immigrants, they are so scared. When my case was with the FBI, I never had the courage to talk. I thought she's going to deport me. That was just going on in my mind. I said,
yes.
And people are all the community members, the traffickers is their own people. You're gone. You're getting deported. Your case is with the FBI. And I was not talking to her. I was not sharing with her anything. So that's why I really respect what Carol and Jen are doing. They're so humble. They're so honest. Carol came to my house all the way from Columbus. And when I said, I'm coming. But this means a lot. And I want to share with the audience today. She came all the way from Columbus, came to my house and spent a couple of hours. And she was so cool. And today I respect that. And this means a lot to a survivor. You don't know, because they are abused so much, they are threatened so much. It's a huge blessing. And at times, you all are doing a very good job, like Mother Teresa. You all don't know, because you think, just no. Because even if Attorney General comes and met me, shook hands with me, I feel, wow. And that is what the victims and survivors needs to know. I just want to give a small example. when my case was with the FBI, it's not a question I was not cooperating, but I was not communicating her openly. Because I thought, like, if she comes to know I did this, because there were certain things I was told to do, which was, I had no choice. And on paper, it looked that I'm a fraud, I'm a criminal. And then she came one day to my house. I didn't know about CP, continued presence. She got me the CP, but she got food to my house. But before that, she was always like a FBI agent. But once she realized that I am a victim of labor trafficking and I'm a victim, she flipped on her own. She always came to my house. And then one day she came to my house, she stepped out, and she come to ask me some questions, and maybe I didn't answer her rightly or whatever. She came and knocked the door again, and she came and said, Harold, my job is to, like what Jen said, it's to just to help you, to get you a status, to get you a green card. She said that. And she said, Harold, you might be working illegally somewhere to and getting cash to run your family. That's not my job. I'm not here to do that. And I was working at a store and they're paying me cash. We have to run a family. And I thought, if this FBI agent comes to know, she will straight away deport me. But when she said that, Harold, my job is only to help you. Do whatever you have to do. That gave me such a big relief. I said, oh, wow. Like, so that's how I tell many law enforcement agencies, like, I don't know whether they have the jurisdiction to talk, but talk to the victim. No, I'm not here to get you arrested, not get you here to deported. I am here to help you. As far as you don't have any criminal records, and in case if there's any criminal record which was forced by the perpetrator, I'm trying to bail you out. When you say that victim, he comes down. And that is what, like, the Attorney General's office friends and audience who are watching today globally, in Ohio, in US, these people are really, like, I would say angels or gods, because I work with Jen and Carol. It is not in words, in deeds. I'm really emotional. I really get attached. Even when Dancy came to the Attorney General's for a presentation, when Carol had come to our house, and when she met the Attorney General, my wife's entire vision changed. The one is when you talk and when you meet. It is two different aspects. And when people start believing, and when people, I tell the victims today, like, I'm working on this, people are scared. I said, no, I will, till you fill this form and you don't have any criminal records, you will not get arrested and deported. They say, no, this form will give to the ICE or to the Homeland Security and they'll come and deport us. I said, no, till I'm there, and if I give to anybody, they cannot touch you, they have to touch me. So that is, they're struggling. So it's a fact. And what Carol, Jen, Yvan, and Attorney General Demosthenes is doing is a very good thing. And today, a lot of victims' life will change. I'll be very honest, and thankful to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Harold, thank you for what you do. For those that are listening to us talk and chat, since I've met Harold, watching him every day, saving these starfish, one starfish at a time, he and his wife, it's been amazing to watch and become part of this. And I invite others to go out to the site, eyesopeninternational.org, learn more. I know that Harold will be ecstatic if he gets a phone call or a message from someone wanting to learn more, know how they can support and be part of this as well. So Harold, thank you for all you do. It's truly been an honor, and I can tell from Carol and Jen too, they feel the same way. So whatever we can do to help you keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I have a question on the comment section from our viewer. Would you like to take that now? I mean, I'll just read out the question. Whoever is likely to, can explain on that. So Mr. Chetna Shrestha has asked this question, like, do most of the traffickers get convicted? What are the penalties laid on them? And what's the number of trafficked cases from Nepal? I think it's from Nepal, I think. So do we have any number on the cases? They're interested on, like, what kind of numbers we have for the trafficking cases from Nepal, and what kind of penalties are laid on them. So they want to know about that, I think.
And we're going to punt on that question because we are limited basically to, well, Jen may have done more research, but I have not done anything on Nepal.
Oh, okay.
Harold, do you guys keep these numbers?
I have a lot of victims I worked with from Nepal. And in Ohio, when I was trafficked, so there were a lot of Nepalis, and I'm still in touch with them, but they're in many different states. But there are a lot of Nepalis victims here, honestly, lots. And I've seen most of them work at the restaurants, gas stations, convenience stores, motels. And I don't know about the other areas, but I am in touch with more than, I would say, 3 or 4 dozen like people of Nepalis. But they're very good people, but at the same breath, they're very scared.
Yep.
Okay.
And trafficking, if it's taken federally through the federal system, will have different penalties than if taken through the state system. Jen, I don't know if you want to talk about what the trafficking penalties are in Ohio. Like I said, you're much more in tune with that than I am.
Sure. So in Ohio, the violation is called trafficking in persons, and that covers both labor and sex trafficking. It's just under the same law violation. And if someone is convicted, they will go to prison. It's mandatory. They cannot get probation if they're convicted of that crime. And the judge will pick a number between 10 and 15 years. And so that's what the judge will do. And that's for one count. So depending on how your prosecutor charges, if they have multiple counts, it could be that same amount, or they could add them up. And so it can really vary. As for do most of the traffickers get convicted? I think that we're seeing more and more cases come up, and we're seeing more and more court successes. Convictions might look different in terms of it might be a plea so that the victims don't have to testify. And as long as the victims agree with the plea, we'll be okay with that. And so that's still a conviction. And I do know that we have had a few trials that go forward where the traffickers have been convicted. And so I say all of that to encourage people to continue to come forward and know that once you start interacting with us, we're going to work very hard for you.
Yes, we need more people to come report, and then that's how the system works better, right? Like,
yes.
So as we all know, like, we need a lot of awareness to this labor trafficking, and I see Mr. Errol as being like doing a great job on this topic, and he's also like into a movie production in wherein his story is being like taken as a movie, and yeah, that's definitely a medium of creating awareness. That's what I see as a movie, like when he says. So, Mr. Errol, could you please share us your thoughts on that?
I'm not into movie production. It's all the blessing of Jen.
Taken as biopic.
Yeah, so they only started, like, I know they contacted me. I think my story went viral in India, which was done by Humans of Bombay. So it was, when I say viral, it was like millions of people, and it reached the producers, directors of the film industry, and they came and approached me. It was never in my dreams, or it was never that I thought. So they approached me. That's one. And number two is that Martin Sheen, who is the executive producer of To Be Free. So Benjamin Nathan, he had come to our house to do a shoot for Bradley, my son, a couple of years back, I think 4 or 5 years back. And it was about prevent blindness, about the vision. And then he came to know about labor trafficking or human trafficking. So can you imagine, see, that's what Yvan is doing and community members. Once he never knew anything about human trafficking, labor trafficking, or anything of that nature. And that was the first time he heard. And that inspired him. And that is how that To Be Free documentary is coming up. And I think he's going to collaborate with the Attorney General's office, with Yost in the film. And I don't know how he's going to work. So it's all a blessing. And I'm very thankful to the community of Cincinnati and Ohio, because it is the community of Cincinnati who literally saved me. I'll be very honest, the Americans. And I'm really thankful. And what I'm doing is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I just want to give back to the community, because they not only saved me, they saved my wife and my 2 sons. And today, both my sons are doing really good. Like, Bradley's working for Tesla, and my younger son wants to be a pro on tennis. So these all things would have not been possible. So I'm very, very thankful, very, very grateful. And I don't know whether in my entire life period, I can repay back to whether it is Carol, Jen, Yvan, Attorney General Yost, Mike Yvan. There are so many people, End Slavery, Sycamore School District. So many people have prayed for me from my church, on the streets. I still become very emotional when I see that, and I know it's a very long journey for a victim or a survivor. And that's the reason I want to be the voice, courage, hope, and freedom for all the victims in labor trafficking, immigrants, including sex trafficking, and see that everybody should live their life with freedom, like the human rights, That's the basic need that everybody should have. So thank you.
Definitely, yes. And Mr. Yvan, could you tell us about more on your advisory role with Eyes Open International?
Yes, so I met Harold through a mutual organization you mentioned, the United States Global Leadership Coalition. And during that time together, we since we realized we lived close to each other, so I got to learn a little bit more about him, learn more about his story, and the nonprofit that he now has, Eyes Open International. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I've had the opportunity for the last 15 years or so to be very active in the nonprofit community, especially here in Cincinnati, and was able to provide some of my experience and share some ideas and whatnot with Harold. And as an advisor, I continue to do that, connecting him with additional resources, how to continue the operations that's needed for nonprofits, like all the non-fun stuff, right? So these are the things that need to be done, but behind the scenes, Harold has to make sure he's speaking with accountants, he's speaking with developers about the website, he's working with communications and media, etc. So I've been helping him with that.
Awesome. You're doing an awesome job, Mr. Yvan.
But I'll try to keep up the good work.
Yes, definitely. So, Mr. Rausch, do we have any more questions which we want to discuss? Or?
I think we're already over the time, I think.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think we're over time at 20 minutes. The discussion will go on for another 60 minutes, I think. But I thank Carol and Jen, y'all and Yvan, y'all have done an amazing job. And I think because this is going to be recorded and it's going to be on the YouTube and it's going to be played, and I'm going to send it to a lot of victims and survivors, because I always noted that traffickers or perpetrators are one step ahead. They follow you and they follow the law, but the victims do not follow because they don't have the talent, they don't have the education, they don't have the equipments. So I want this to go more to the victims and survivors. And Ian, I'm happy that even the traffickers are watching this.
Yeah. We should make the victims more aware, and we should clear off that ignorance, and they need the education on what exactly is with labor trafficking, and they should know the laws, and they should be aware that people like Carol and Jennifer, they are so sweet people. They are here. People are there for them. That's the main thing they would like to know. So definitely, I think this was an amazing session because it's more of an informative session rather. Yeah, I would say that. And I think people are really gonna get more information from this video, when it's being shared across. And thanks for Mr. Harold, he has taken a step to arrange this discussion with each of you. And most importantly, we had a renowned Attorney General on our show today, and that has been a big thing for people who have been victims or survivors. It's a big thing for them, and definitely great thanks to everyone here.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you all for joining.